Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me for this segment, we have Kent Bennett, partner at Bessemer Venture Partners, to discuss the state of the cloud report. We'll take a look at IT spend, the new way to measure the promise and performance of cloud companies, and why being a Centaur is the new milestone to celebrate. Kent, it is great to see you. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thanks, Jill. So much fun to be here.
Yeah, the State of the Cloud report is always one of my favorite items to cover. There's so much good information in there. Let's talk about the trends that are continuing to drive cloud adoption.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously the elephant in the cloud room this year is that the markets are down substantially. So the cloud index that we track is down over 50% in the past, since basically November of last year. And that's just a monumentous splash for all cloud investors. And that's going to have an impact on the way that all entrepreneurs think about building their cloud businesses. And so that's a big factor. But in the meantime, the actual businesses themselves have stayed pretty darn healthy. And so, at Bessemer, as we sort of took a breath and said, holy cow, like the markets have taken a total nosedive, and yet the businesses we work with every day are doing really well. Like, what do we say about the cloud? And so a big focus for us this year was to really reset the way we describe these businesses and focus ourselves much more on the fundamental metrics, most notably revenue, that we use to measure their health, as opposed to valuations, which frankly we all got distracted by in the past several years as valuations flew high.
What are expectations for IT spend?
Well, certainly we expect people to spend more money on tech. I mean, I think that's been a pretty good bet in the last 50, 60 years that tech spending will increase every year, and we don't see any pullback in the years ahead. I mean, especially with the cloud trends. Fundamentally, what is cloud? Cloud is the ability to deliver software through the internet. So that innovation is a huge idea. And allows you to deliver software that is both functionally better than some legacy alternative or than some use case where you didn't use software at all. So it gives you functional improvements, and it's incredibly cheap to deliver it. And so that sort of better, cheaper combo is a pretty good one. And that's the reason we've seen like a multi-decade now trend of increased IT spending. And we expect that not to change even as we enter like possibly a tougher macro environment. This is, it's always good to have things that are cheaper and help you do things more productively at the same time.
And Kent, you had mentioned before that we got distracted by valuation. What's the new way to measure the promise and performance of cloud companies and kind of removing ourselves from the overhyped unicorn?
Yes. So 10 years ago, Aileen Lee wrote an incredibly thoughtful blog post about unicorns. And I think at the time there were like 40 private unicorns in the world. And she described them incredibly well, talked about the trends that had led to those very special set of companies. Most people read that blog post and thought, I want to be a unicorn. And that was like the major takeaway that the tech economy took, was like, I want to have $1 billion valuation, not necessarily like the detailed analysis of what it took to be those companies. And in the decade that followed, we just saw a massive rush to be named a unicorn, whether or not you sort of had earned the same status that the companies on those lists had. And as a result, last year we had 500 new unicorns minted. So 40 in the world 10 years ago, 500 made last year, almost 2 a day. So it's basically become like an unsustainable term that means a whole lot less than it used to. If you look back to a decade ago, what did a unicorn mean? Well, in enterprise software, it typically meant a business that had $100 million of revenue. So at that time, revenue was valued at somewhere around 10 times revenue to valuations. And therefore, to be a unicorn, you had to have 100 million of ARR, of recurring revenue. And so that is the milestone that we've tried to reclaim in our latest report as what we're calling the Centaur Mark. So a cloud business, a software business that can reach that level of $100 million of recurring revenue, we think is the measure of a truly healthy business. And if in aggregate, if you look at all of those businesses in the world, it's a great way to track like how real is this cloud trend, how much is it growing, and is it here to stay or not. And the good news there is that despite what we think is a massive surge of unicorns and a crash that we can already see in the data in terms of unicorns minted in the last quarter, the Centaur pace is every bit as healthy as it was years ago. It's accelerated every year. We saw more Centaurs created last year than any year on record, and we're on pace this year to create more Centaurs than we were last year, despite the market pullback.
And Ken, we know that a lot of these trends were accelerated as a result of the pandemic and as we all learn to work and operate in a hybrid fashion. What's next as the cloud evolves? Because that really was part of powering this journey for us.
Yeah, what's next? Well, there are a bunch of different trends. Maybe I'll highlight a couple. For one, cloud businesses, software businesses are in so many cases becoming the core operating system to an industry that they serve. And as they become the core operating system, they look around and they notice all these other adjacent, massively valuable businesses, banking, lending, payments, payroll, et cetera. And they realize, these software businesses realize that they can operate those adjacent, often financial lines of business and monetize them in extremely well, and use that value to deliver better software, better support, better sales, et cetera. So that's a major trend. It's effectively using cloud as the core and bundling a bunch of other services around it that's driving success, especially in industry. Another trend that we think is really interesting and has come on really quickly is what we call the cloud going to market. So cloud software being sold through independent marketplaces. So 10 years ago, 20 years ago, if you're an enterprise, there weren't that many pieces of software you're purchasing. But now as an enterprise, you're purchasing hundreds and hundreds of different pieces of software. And it makes sense that just like we don't want to go to, a banana store and an Apple store, we want to go to a grocery store where we can buy all these things in one place. And so we're seeing increasingly some of these third-party marketplaces, sometimes the public cloud providers, or other cloud ecosystems that are selling a lot of other people's software. And we think that's a trend that really got started a few years ago and has accelerated rapidly. And we expect much more from that in the years ahead.
Is it too late for late adopters?
For late adopters in the cloud, no. Great news. It's actually getting easier. So like many of these tech cycles, the early adopters had to deal with a little bit of pain. So 20 years ago, if you wanted to adopt cloud software, it wasn't perfect. It wasn't full featured in many ways. And often, depending on you as the enterprise or the consumer adopter, maybe you had some concerns with privacy, with security, with other things that made cloud software a little bit scary in the early days. All of those problems are being solved. The software is getting much, much more performant. So if you adopt a piece of software today, it's going to be a whole lot better than the one years ago. So that's going to make life easier for you. And also these pieces of cloud software are often figuring out ways to sort of work with the late adopters. So maybe they have some security concerns for a pretty good reason. Maybe they're a company that has like a lot of high security, incredibly sensitive data, and the modern cloud software can often work with you to leave that data in place in the protection that you have it in today, and make the on-ramp to the cloud much easier. So no, the cloud is coming for the late adopters. It's getting easier and easier to buy cloud software, and yeah, life should be better in the years ahead.
And one more question about Outlook. How is the cloud playing a pivotal role in closing the gap of global productivity?
Yeah, so again, software delivered through the internet is just an incredibly productive development for the world. So that is going to solve a ton of productivity problems. Maybe some obvious ones that we're all facing are the problem of how to work in this new kind of remote and hybrid work and collaborative world. Obviously, we wouldn't be talking right now without a really nice piece of software called Zoom. And so that's a totally obvious one that's been rolled out to the global workforce and made things incredibly productive, so that we, in some ways, hardly missed a beat in the last 2 years. And then across all the types of work that we do, we're seeing cloud software play a key role in coordinating project planning, coordinating communications, et cetera. So that's an obvious and easy one where the cloud's going to bring productivity to the world. The other place where we pay a lot of attention is, the trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of the global economy that are mainly transacting via fax machine and phone. So like most of the old school industrial world is still doing business offline in a sense. And increasingly, we're seeing modern pieces of cloud software come from those very old world industries and bring them into software, often with a piece of software that might be even free for the beginning, for early adoption. So it's like a total no-brainer for these old school industries to pick up, a new trick. and bringing those trillions of dollars of business to business transactions online. We think that's going to be a massive potential productivity increase for the world.
It's so funny, Ken. I don't think I've heard the word fax machine in 2022 at all. When you said that, it just occurred to me that we didn't even think of those terms anymore.
Yeah.
So
try to buy steel in this country. You're going to be sending some faxes still.
Right.
I mean, so some of these very big industries are still kind of living a couple decades ago.
Yeah. I mean, we're just so used to doing everything, over computers. I mean, even with scanning with different types of document software now, you don't even really need to scan anymore. So it really is, it just took me by surprise that it hadn't occurred to me. I haven't even thought about a fax this year. So finally, how does Bessemer Venture Partners work with cloud companies to help them achieve Centaur status?
Yeah, so the dirty secret of venture capital is that the first part of our job is picking incredible companies that have a level of product market fit that is so radical that they can actually grow really rapidly and really efficiently. So that's the hard part, is picking the right companies and doing no harm. But then, I think the major benefit we have is because we have seen, several hundred of these companies go from nothing to hundreds of millions of revenue. We've seen that playbook, and we've got a lot of benchmarks, and we've got a deep network of people who've been there before, who are constantly introducing to our companies who aspire to be those next Centaurs. So it's not rocket science. It's simply like having seen a long list of really successful companies and having those companies be willing to work with and pay forward to the younger companies following them behind.
All right, Ken, appreciate the insight as always. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill
Pleasure.
Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.